The dust of Redemption Creek settled on everything like a shroud. 6 months had passed since Reverend Thomas McKenna drew his last breath, leaving behind a congregation still mourning their shepherd and a widow whose grief had calcified into something harder than the red rocks surrounding their frontier town. Sarah McKenna stood at her kitchen window, watching the sun bleed across the horizon. At 27, she wore black from collar to hem, the uniform of widowhood that transformed her from woman to monument. The townspeople expected nothing less from the preacher's widow, a living testament to propriety and Christian virtue in this lawless land. The knock at her door came precisely at 4, as it did every Tuesday. Sarah smoothed her skirts and opened to find Martha Whitmore and her flock of church ladies, their faces pinched with the peculiar satisfaction of those who confuse judgment with righteousness. "Sister Sarah," Martha intoned, sweeping past without invitation. "We've come for our weekly devotional." The women arranged themselves in Sarah's modest parlor like crows on a fence line. For 2 hours, they dissected scripture and gossip with equal fervor, reminding Sarah repeatedly of her blessed burden as keeper of Thomas's memory. "A woman's virtue is her fortress," declared Constance Harper, whose husband owned the largest ranch outside town. "Especially a widow's. The eyes of the Lord and Redemption Creek are upon you, dear." Sarah nodded, her fingers working the worn edges of her Bible. She had memorized these sermons, not from Thomas's preaching, but from the endless chorus of women who seemed to guard her chastity more fiercely than she ever could. As the ladies departed in a rustle of bombazine and righteousness, Sarah caught her reflection in the hall mirror. The woman staring back seemed a stranger, pale as parchment, eyes dimmed like lamp wicks turned too low. She touched her face, wondering when she had become this ghost. The afternoon heat drove most folks indoors, leaving Main Street deserted save for a few horses tied to hitching posts. Sarah ventured out for supplies, her list modest flour, salt, thread. The general store offered blessed anonymity, its dim interior a refuge from prying eyes. She had just reached for a bolt of black cloth when the bell above the door chimed. A man entered, bringing with him the scent of leather, trail dust, and something indefinable, perhaps danger, perhaps freedom. Sarah's hand stilled on the fabric. The stranger moved with the easy grace of one accustomed to vast spaces, tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin that spoke of countless miles beneath open skies. His clothes were practical worn denim, leather vest, boots that had seen better decades, but it was his eyes that held her attention, gray as winter storms, holding depths she couldn't fathom. "Afternoon," he said to Mr. Jameson behind the counter, his voice low and measured. The shopkeeper's demeanor shifted instantly from affable to guarded. "Help you with something?" "Coffee, tobacco, ammunition." The stranger laid coins on the wood with deliberate precision. "And information, if you're inclined, looking for work." "No work here for drifters," Jameson replied curtly. "Best try the next town." The stranger's lips curved in what might have been amusement. "Every town's the next town. Seems like—" His gaze swept the store, pausing briefly on Sarah before moving on. She felt that glance like a physical touch, heat flooding her cheeks beneath her widow's veil. He collected his purchases and left without another word. Through the window, Sarah watched him lead a dusty roan to the water trough. The horse bore the marks of hard travel, lean flanks, worn saddle, bedroll that had seen too many nights under stars. "Best keep clear of that one," Jameson muttered, noting her attention. "Jack Corian, if that's even his real name, rode in this morning. Has the look of trouble." Sarah murmured something appropriate and fled with her purchases. But as she walked home, she found herself glancing back at the stranger, Jack Corian, who now sat on his heels in the shade, rolling a cigarette with practiced ease. Their eyes met across the dusty expanse, and something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, though they had never met. Understanding. Maybe, between two souls marked by invisible wounds. That evening, Sarah attended prayer meeting out of duty rather than devotion. The small church Thomas had shepherded felt cavernous without his presence. Reverend Matthews, young and earnest, had arrived from St. Louis 2 months prior, full of fresh seminary zeal that grated against the frontier's harsh realities. As the congregation filed out, Sarah lingered, seeking solitude among the empty pews. The church had been her husband's kingdom, but it had never felt like home. Too many nights she'd knelt here, praying for feelings that wouldn't come, for the love a wife should bear her husband, for the passion that other women whispered about behind closed doors. A creak from the back door made her turn. Jack Corian stood silhouetted in the doorway, hat in hand. "Pardon the intrusion, ma'am. Saw the door open. Thought I might—" He gestured vaguely at the sanctuary. "The house of God welcomes all souls," Sarah heard herself say, though the words felt like recitation. He stepped inside, his spurs ringing softly on the floorboards. In the lamplight, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver threading through dark hair at his temples. He moved through the sacred space like a man unaccustomed to ceilings, his gaze taking in the modest altar, the rough-hewn cross. "Your husband built this place?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. "How did you—" "Widow's weeds, empty parsonage next door. Town this size. Doesn't take much figuring." He studied her with those storm-gray eyes. "My condolences." Sarah nodded, unsure why she remained. Propriety dictated she should leave immediately, a widow alone with a strange man. In church, no less. But something held her there. Perhaps the way he looked at her without the mixture of pity and calculation she'd grown accustomed to. "You knew Thomas?" she ventured. "Knew of him. Heard he was a good man. Righteous." The word hung between them, carrying weight she couldn't define. Sarah found herself speaking without intention. Righteousness is cold comfort on winter nights. The confession shocked her. She pressed fingers to her lips as if to recall the words, but Jack merely nodded. "Cold comfort any night, I'd wager." He moved to the window, gazing out at the vast darkness beyond. This land doesn't much care for righteousness. It wants survivors. "And which are you, Mr. Corian?" He turned back to her, a ghost of a smile playing at his lips. Still figuring that out. "Ma'am." They stood in silence, the space between them charged with unspoken questions. Finally, Jack set his hat back on his head, touching the brim in farewell. "I'll bid you good evening, Mrs. McKenna." "How did you know my name?" "Same way you know mine. Small town. Dust settles on everyone equal." After he left, Sarah remained in the empty church, her heart beating with unfamiliar rhythm. She tried to pray, but the words scattered like tumbleweeds. Instead, she found herself thinking of gray eyes and the scent of distant places, of a voice that spoke of survival rather than salvation. Walking home beneath stars sharp as glass, Sarah felt the first crack in the fortress of her widowhood. It frightened her, this hairline fracture in her carefully maintained facade. But beneath the fear stirred something else, a warmth she'd thought buried with Thomas, or perhaps never known at all. In her small bedroom, she unpinned her hair and studied her reflection by candlelight. The severe hairstyle and mourning dress had transformed her into exactly what the town expected the preacher's widow, pious and untouchable. But beneath the black fabric beat a heart that had never stopped yearning, dreams that had never ceased their restless wandering. She thought of Jack Corian, of the way he moved through space as if he owned it all and none of it. A drifter. Jameson had said, a man with no roots, no bonds, no cage of expectations, the very opposite of everything her life had become. Sarah blew out the candle and lay in the darkness, listening to coyotes cry in the distant hills. For the first time in 6 months, her prayers went unspoken. Instead, she wondered what it would be like to saddle a horse and ride toward those wild voices, to leave behind the black dresses and weekly devotionals, to discover what kind of woman existed beneath the widow's weeds. It was a dangerous thought. She knew, the kind that could unravel everything she'd built, everything she was supposed to be, but as sleep finally claimed her. Sarah found herself clinging to it like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman who'd forgotten she was drowning until someone offered rescue. Tomorrow would bring new battles with propriety, new reminders of her place in Redemption Creek's careful order. But tonight, in the privacy of her own heart, Sarah McKenna allowed herself to remember she was more than a title, more than a role. She was a woman with blood in her veins, and fire banked so low she'd almost forgotten its existence. Almost, but not quite. And somewhere in the darkness beyond her window, a stranger made camp under stars that promised nothing and everything, unknowing that he had already begun to reshape the careful boundaries of her world. Sleep had become Sarah's enemy in the days following her encounter with Jack Korean. She would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, while memories of her marriage played like a worn pianola roll, the same notes, endlessly repeating. Thomas had been 15 years her senior when they married. She was 18, fresh from her father's farm, grateful to escape the endless toil of prairie life. The Reverend had seemed worldly then, with his educated speech and gentle manner. Her parents had been thrilled, their daughter married to a man of God, elevated above their humble station. But marriage had proved another kind of toil. Thomas was kind in his distant way, treating her more like a favored student than a wife. Their intimate moments were brief, performed in darkness and silence, leaving Sarah feeling more alone than before. She would lie afterward, listening to his satisfied snores, wondering if this hollowness was what all wives felt. "You're wool-gathering again," he would chide when he caught her staring out windows. "Idle hands. Sarah, there's mending to be done." Always mending, always duty, always the perfect preacher's wife, smiling benignly while inside, something wild and unnamed paced like a caged cougar. And now, as dawn painted Redemption Creek in shades of rose and gold, Sarah found herself at the window again, but this time she watched with purpose. Jack Korean had made camp at the edge of town, near the cottonwoods by Miller's Creek. She could see the thin line of his campfire smoke rising in the still morning air. Chiding herself for foolishness, she turned to her morning tasks. Water for washing, fire for cooking, bread to bake for the church social. Her hands moved automatically through familiar motions, while her mind wandered forbidden paths. The sun climbed higher, and with it, the heat. By noon, the town dozed in shimmering waves of hot air. Sarah, her morning chores complete, found herself walking toward the well near the town square, a path that happened to pass by Miller's Creek. She saw him before he noticed her approach. Jack stood shirtless by the stream, washing the dust from his skin. Sarah froze, knowing she should turn away but unable to move. Water ran in rivulets down his back. Tracing scars that spoke of violence survived. His body was lean, hardened by years under open skies, so different from Thomas's soft, pale flesh. A twig snapped under her foot. Jack turned, unhurried, reaching for the shirt draped over a nearby branch. Their eyes met across the space between propriety and desire. "Mrs. McKenna." He pulled on the shirt but left it unbuttoned, a concession to the heat that left his chest partially exposed. "Hot day for a walk." She gestured vaguely toward the well, the lie transparent as glass. "Water's cooler here by the creek," he said, matter of fact, "though I reckon that's not what brought you." Heat flooded her cheeks. "I should go." "Should?" He studied her, head tilted slightly. "Interesting word. Should. Carries a lot of weight for something so small." Sarah found herself moving closer, drawn by something stronger than sense. "You speak like an educated man, Mr. Korean." "Had some schooling. Before," he shrugged. "Before I chose different lessons." "And what lessons were those?" That walls built to protect can also imprison. That safety and living aren't always the same thing. He sat on a fallen log, gesturing for her to join him. She hesitated, then perched on the far end, maintaining careful distance. You're speaking in riddles. Am I? He pulled tobacco from his vest, rolling a cigarette with practiced ease. You tell me, Mrs. McKenna, do you feel safe? The question caught her like a physical blow. Of course, this is my home. My husband's... Your husband's dead. The words were gentle despite their bluntness. What's yours? Sarah stared at him. This stranger who dared voice what no one else would say. Everything I have was his. This town, the church, my very name. Names can be changed, towns can be left behind. For men, perhaps, a woman alone has fewer choices. Jack lit his cigarette, smoke curling lazy in the still air. Fewer isn't none. They sat in silence, the creek murmuring between them. Sarah knew she should leave. Every moment here increased the risk of discovery, of scandal. But something held her. Some recognition of a kindred restlessness in this man who owned nothing but his freedom. Why did you come to Redemption Creek? She asked finally. Following the wind. It blew me here. It'll blow me away again. He glanced at her, though maybe not as quick as planned. The implication hung between them, dangerous as a loaded gun. Sarah stood abruptly, smoothing her skirts. I must go. The church social... More shoulds and musts. He rose too, moving closer. When do you get to want Mrs. McKenna? She backed away, but he followed, not threatening, just present. Please. That's a start. Please, what? I don't know, she whispered, and it was the truest thing she'd said in months. Jack stopped his advance, something softening in his expression. Fair enough, but when you figure it out, you know where to find me. Sarah fled then, her dignity in tatters, her heart thundering like hoofbeats. She didn't look back, couldn't look back, because she knew what she'd see, a man who looked at her not as the preacher's widow but as a woman, and that was more terrifying than any impropriety. The church social that afternoon was torture. Sarah served lemonade and smiled at neighbors while inside. Her thoughts churned like storm clouds. Every time the door opened, her pulse jumped, half expecting, half dreading to see Jack walk in. You're flushed, dear, Martha Whitmore observed, her eyes sharp as a hawk's. Are you feeling well? The heat, Sarah murmured. It's oppressive today. Indeed. I hear that drifter is still lurking about. Sheriff Thompson should run him off before he causes trouble. What harm has he done? The words escaped before Sarah could stop them. Martha's eyebrows rose. Why, Sarah McKenna, one might think you were defending the man. I merely believe in Christian charity, Sarah said carefully. Judge not, as Thomas always preached. Your late husband also preached about the wages of sin, Martha countered. Some men carry trouble like a disease, best to keep clear. That evening, Sarah found herself in Thomas's study, surrounded by his books and sermons. She pulled down his Bible, trying to find comfort in familiar passages. But the words swam before her eyes, meaningless as dust. A soft knock interrupted her futile efforts. She opened the door to find Jack standing on her porch, hat in hand. Forgive the intrusion, he said. Your wagon's got a broken wheel. Noticed it when I passed. Thought I might fix it, if you've no objection. She should refuse. Should send him away. Should. Instead, she heard herself say, the tools are in the barn. She watched from the doorway as he worked, efficient and capable. The dying light caught in his hair, turned his movements to poetry. When he tested the repair, the wheel spun true. Should hold now, he said, wiping his hands on a rag. Though these old wagons need constant tending. Like everything in this life. Sarah replied, constant mending, constant maintenance. Not everything. He moved closer, and she didn't retreat. Some things are meant to run wild. Mr. Corian. Jack. He was close enough now that she could smell the leather and tobacco. The indefinable scent of freedom. My name's Jack. Jack. The word felt dangerous on her tongue. You should go. There's that word again. But he stepped back, giving her space. I'll be heading to Carson City soon. Week, maybe 2. Thought you should know. The news hit her like cold water. Of course he would leave. Drifters always did. I see. Do you? He studied her in the gathering dusk. Because from where I stand, I see a woman dying of thirst while sitting next to a well. You know nothing about me. I know you walk like someone carrying invisible chains. I know you look at the horizon like it's a locked door. I know you came to the creek today not for water, but for something you can't name. He put on his hat. I know because I've been there. He left without waiting for a response, disappearing into the darkness like smoke. Sarah stood frozen on her porch, his words echoing in the space between heartbeats. That night, she dreamed of riding through endless grasslands, her hair unbound and streaming in the wind. She woke with tears on her cheeks and an ache in her chest that felt like grief and birth combined. The next days passed in a haze of conflicted emotion. Sarah went through her routines, cleaning, mending, attending services, while inside, a war raged. She found herself taking different paths through town, ones that might lead past the cottonwoods. Sometimes she glimpsed Jack working odd jobs, fixing fences, breaking horses, loading supplies. He never approached her in public, but she felt his awareness like a physical touch. One evening, as purple shadows stretched long across the desert, Sarah made a decision. She waited until full dark, then slipped out her back door and made her way to the creek. Jack sat by his fire, whittling something from a piece of wood. He didn't look up when she approached, but shifted to make room beside him. I don't know what I'm doing here, she said. Honest start. He handed her the wood, a bird, wings spread in flight. Sometimes not knowing is the first step to finding out. She turned the carving in her hands, marveling at the delicate details. Where did you learn this? Old Apache taught me, down in Arizona territory. Said hands needed purpose when the mind was restless. And is your mind restless? He looked at her then, firelight dancing in his gray eyes, more lately than usual. They talked through the night, or rather, Jack talked and Sarah listened, hungry for stories of places she'd never see. He spoke of desert blooms after rain, of mountains that scraped the sky, of nights so clear you could read by starlight. With each tale, the walls of her world expanded, showing her how small her cage truly was. I should hate you, she said as dawn approached, for showing me what I can't have. Can't? He touched her hand, the first deliberate contact between them. Or won't. She pulled away, standing. For a woman, there's little difference. That's fear talking. Fear keeps us alive. No. He stood too, facing her in the gray pre-dawn. Fear keeps us from dying, not the same as living. Sarah looked at him, this man who owned nothing but his horse and gun, who slept under stars and followed no law but his own conscience. She thought of her small house, her widow's pension, her place in Redemption Creek's careful order, security, respectability, prison. Teach me, she whispered. What? To tell the difference between surviving and living. Jack smiled then, the first full smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his face, revealing the man beneath the drifter's mask. That's not something taught Sarah, it's something chosen. She left as the sun crested the horizon, knowing everything had changed. The widow's weeds felt heavier with each step, the role she played more suffocating. But beneath it all, something new had taken root, Not love, not yet, but possibility. And in a life that had held no possibilities. That was revolution enough. Back in her kitchen, Sarah caught her reflection in the window glass. The woman looking back had secrets now, had tasted danger and found it sweet. She thought of Thomas, of his careful sermons about temptation, the wages of sin. She murmured to her reflection. Then, with a smile that would have horrified her husband, she added, "Might be worth the price." The moon hung full and bright as a silver dollar when Jack appeared at Sarah's back door 3 nights later. She'd been expecting him, or perhaps expecting herself to go to him. The anticipation had wound her tight as a watch spring. "There's something I want to show you," he said simply. Sarah glanced back at her empty house, at the lamp burning in Thomas's study where she'd been failing to concentrate on correspondence. "It's late. Best time for truth-telling." He extended his hand. "Trust me." Those 2 words should have sent her back inside, back to safety. Instead, she took his hand, feeling the calluses of a life lived honestly, and let him lead her into the night. They walked in silence through the sleeping town, past darkened windows and judgment temporarily suspended. Jack had brought an extra horse, a gentle mare that stood patient in the shadows. "You want me to ride?" Sarah stared at the animal. "I haven't." Thomas didn't approve of women riding astride. "Thomas isn't here." Jack's voice was gentle but firm. "And side saddle's no good where we're going." He helped her mount, his hands steady at her waist. The sensation of the horse between her legs, powerful and alive, sent a shock through her system. Freedom had a feeling, she discovered, and it started here. They rode out past the town limits, past the last flickering lights of civilization, into the vast darkness of the desert. Jack led the way, sure and steady, while Sarah concentrated on not falling, on breathing, on the revolutionary act of being a woman on horseback at midnight. Finally, they stopped at the crest of a hill. Below, Redemption Creek looked small as a child's toy town. Above, the sky stretched infinite, stars scattered like spilled salt across black velvet. "Beautiful," Sarah breathed. "This is my church," Jack said, dismounting with easy grace. "No walls, no ceiling, no sermons. Just truth big enough to swallow whole towns and their pequeños dramas." He helped her down, his hands lingering a moment longer than necessary. They stood side by side, looking out at the vastness. "I used to climb onto our roof as a girl," Sarah said. "Father would rage, mother would weep, but I couldn't stop. I needed to see beyond our fence lines." "What happened to that girl?" "She learned to be good, to be quiet, to want what she was supposed to want." Sarah laughed, bitter as alkali water. "She married a preacher and forgot about rooftops. Maybe she just went to sleep for a while." Jack spread a blanket on the ground, gesturing for her to sit. She did, aware of every inch of space between them, of the impropriety of being alone with a man who wasn't her husband. Except Thomas was dead. And she was more alone in their marriage bed than she'd ever been on this hillside. "Tell me about your life before," she said, "before you became a drifter." He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Had a ranch once, down in Texas. Wife, too. Mary was her name. Prettiest girl in Amarillo. Everyone said." Sarah's heart clenched with unexpected jealousy. "What happened?" "Drought came. Cattle died. Bank took the land. Mary?" He picked up a stone, turned it in his fingers. "She took sick that winter. Nothing dramatic. Just a cough that wouldn't quit. Doc said she needed medicine. Rest, good food, things that cost money I didn't have. Jack." "She died on a Tuesday. Buried her in a dress made from curtains because we'd sold everything else." He threw the stone into the darkness. "After that, walls felt like coffins, so I started moving and haven't stopped." Sarah reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Pain's just another teacher. He squeezed her hand gently. Question is, what do we learn? What did you learn? That security's an illusion. That tomorrow's a promise nobody can keep. That the only moment we truly own is this one. He turned to face her fully, and Sarah's breath caught. In the moonlight, his eyes held depth she wanted to drown in. What do you believe in? Sarah, not what Thomas taught you to believe. What lives in your bones? The question she'd been avoiding, laid bare under stars that didn't care about propriety. Sarah closed her eyes, searching for truth beneath years of careful construction. I don't know, she admitted. I thought I believed in God, in goodness, in the reward of righteous living. But Thomas lived righteously and died anyway, leaving me with nothing but a role to play. I prayed every night of our marriage for feelings that never came, for the contentment other women seem to find in submission. And I think, her voice broke, I think I believe in hunger, in the ache that says there must be more, in the voice that whispers, run when I'm kneeling in church. Is that blasphemy? That's the most honest prayer I've ever heard. Jack moved closer, his free hand rising to cup her cheek. Sarah leaned into the touch, starved for gentleness that asked nothing in return. I should go, she whispered. Should? His thumb traced her cheekbone. There's that word again. Check. You know what I think? I think the widow McKenna hides her desires behind shoulds and musts, because she's afraid of what happens when she stops hiding. You don't understand. Then help me understand. The challenge in his voice sparked something in her, anger, perhaps, or courage. You want to understand, fine. I desire things that would horrify this town. I dream of burning my black dresses and dancing naked under stars. I wake touching myself, imagining hands that aren't my husband's, then spend hours on my knees begging forgiveness for the sin of feeling alive. I look at you and want... She stopped, appalled at her confession. What do you want, Sarah? Things I can't have, things that would ruin me. You're already ruined, he said softly. Ruined for the life they've planned for you. Question is, what will you build from the wreckage? I can't just leave. I have nothing, no money of my own, no skills beyond keeping house and pretending piety. You have more than you know. His hand slid from her cheek to her throat, resting where her pulse hammered. But that's not what's stopping you. Then what is... Jack leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. You're afraid that once you start living, really living, you won't be able to stop, that the hunger will consume you. Sarah shivered, whether from cold or truth she couldn't say. Yes. Good, he whispered. Be afraid, then do it anyway. She turned her head, bringing their faces inches apart. Is that what you did after Mary? Every damn day. His eyes dropped to her lips, until it became easier to fly than to stay grounded. Show me, Sarah breathed. Show me how to fly. Jack made a sound low in his throat, primal and needful. Then his mouth was on hers, and Sarah's world exploded. This was nothing like Thomas's dry, dutiful kisses. This was fire and demand, promise and threat combined. Jack kissed like a man starving, like she was water in the desert, like he wanted to consume her whole. And God help her, she wanted to be consumed. Her hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer. He growled approval, deepening the kiss until she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel. His tongue traced the seam of her lips. Seeking entrance, she gladly gave. The taste of him, tobacco and whiskey and wild spaces flooded her senses. When he pulled back, they were both breathing hard. Sarah touched her lips, feeling burned, transformed. That's flying, Jack said roughly. I want more. Sarah. No. She grabbed his shirt, holding him close. I've been good my whole life. Quiet, proper, dead inside. You woke something in me, Jack Corarian, and now you'll see it through. He searched her face in the moonlight. You sure? Because once this line is crossed... It's already crossed. She kissed him again, pouring all her frustrated longing into the contact. The preacher's widow died the moment you touched me. Question is, who takes her place? Jack groaned and pulled her against him, his hands spanning her waist. You're going to be the death of me, woman. Better than the living death I have known. They kissed until the stars wheeled overhead, until Sarah's lips felt swollen and sensitive, until her body ached with needs she'd only imagined. Jack's hands remained respectful, never venturing beyond her waist, but she felt his desire in the tension of his muscles, the careful distance he maintained between their lower bodies. Finally, he pulled back, breathing ragged. We should get you home. Dawn's not far off. Sarah wanted to protest, to demand more, but wisdom prevailed. She let him help her stand, her legs unsteady as a newborn colt's. The ride back was silent, charged with unspoken promises. At the edge of town, Jack stopped. I'll leave the mare here, he said. Safer if we're not seen together. Sarah dismounted reluctantly, already missing the freedom of horseback. When will I see you again? That's up to you. He leaned down from his saddle, his face serious. I meant what I said about leaving soon. But Sarah, I'd wait, if there was reason. What kind of reason? The kind that doesn't wear widow's weeds and hide behind church walls. He straightened. The kind brave enough to choose her own life. He rode off without waiting for an answer, leaving Sarah standing in the pre-dawn darkness, her whole world rearranged. She made it home just as the eastern sky began to lighten. In her bedroom, she caught sight of herself in the mirror, hair wild, lips swollen, eyes blazing with life. She looked nothing like the proper widow who'd left this house hours ago. The preacher's widow hid her desire. She whispered to her reflection, remembering Jack's words, until the drifter forced a kiss that burned her soul. Forced, no. Offered. And she'd taken it like a woman dying of thirst takes water, desperate, grateful, unable to stop even if it meant drowning. Sarah unpinned her hair, letting it fall free around her shoulders. Tomorrow, today, would bring consequences, questions, choices that would reshape everything. But for now, she held the taste of freedom on her lips and the memory of fire in her blood. For now, she was not the widow McKenna, but simply Sarah, a woman who'd remembered she could fly. And fly she would, no matter who tried to clip her wings. The days following that night on the hill passed in a fever of guilt and longing. Sarah knelt in her bedroom each morning, trying to pray, but the words turned to ash in her mouth. How could she ask forgiveness for something that felt more holy than any sermon she'd ever heard? She pressed her forehead to clasped hands, Thomas's wedding ring cold against her skin. Forgive me, she whispered, but she wasn't sure if she spoke to God, to Thomas's memory, or to herself for waiting so long to truly live. The town continued its slow dance of propriety, unaware that one of its most proper citizens was burning from the inside out. Sarah attended church services, nodded at Reverend Matthew's platitudes about virtue, and felt like a stranger in her own life. 3 days after the kiss, whispers began threading through Redemption Creek like smoke. That drifter, Corian, Martha Whitmore announced during Tuesday's devotional. Sheriff Thompson got a telegram from El Paso. Seems there was trouble down there. A killing. Sarah's hand stilled on her needlework. Surely rumors. Facts, dear. A man named Samuel Morrison was shot dead 6 months ago. They say this Jack Corian was seen leaving town that very night. Martha's eyes glittered with righteous satisfaction. I knew he had the mark of violence on him. The other women clucked and murmured, but Sarah heard them through a growing roar in her ears. Jack, a killer. The hands that had touched her so gently, stained with blood. We must petition Sheriff Thompson to act, Constance Harper declared, before that monster hurt someone here. He's hurt no one, Sarah heard herself say. Every eye turned to her. Martha's gaze sharpened. You seem quite certain, Sarah. I only mean we shouldn't condemn a man on hearsay. Even criminals deserve Christian charity. Your late husband would be shocked, Martha said coldly, to hear you defending a murderer. Sarah rose, her composure hanging by threads. If you'll excuse me, I feel unwell. She fled before they could respond, their whispers following her like accusing fingers. At home, she paced her small parlor, mind racing. Was it true? Had Jack killed a man, and if so, did it matter? Did it? Yes, her trained conscience insisted. Murder was a mortal sin. But another voice, newer and fiercer, whispered, You don't know the truth, and even if it's true, you don't know why. That afternoon brought a dust storm, the kind that turned day to dusk and drove everyone indoors. Sarah stood at her window, watching the world disappear behind a veil of red-brown dust, and made a decision. She wrapped herself in a heavy shawl and fought her way through the storm. The wind tore at her hair, dust filling her mouth and eyes, but she pressed on. By the time she reached the cottonwoods, she could barely see 3 feet ahead. Jack, she called into the howling wind. Jack! A hand caught her arm, pulling her into the relative shelter of a lean-to. Jack's face materialized from the gloom, concern etched in every line. What in hell are you doing out in this? I had to see you. She was shaking, whether from cold or emotion she couldn't tell. They're saying things about El Paso, about a man named Morrison. His face went carefully blank. Are they now? Is it true? Would it matter if it was? Don't! She grabbed his shirt, desperate. Don't hide behind questions. I've risked everything coming here. I deserve truth. Jack studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Inside, this tale's not for telling in a storm. His temporary shelter was crude but effective. Canvas stretched between trees, bedroll laid out neat, few possessions arranged with military precision. Sarah huddled on a crate while Jack lit a lamp against the gloom. Samuel Morrison, he began, voice flat, was what you'd call a gentleman rancher. Owned half of El Paso, including the bank, the biggest saloon, and most of the law. Sarah waited, watching emotions flicker across his weathered face. Also owned a brothel. Liked his girls young, younger than legal, younger than moral. One of them, Annie, was barely 14. Sweet kid who'd run from a bad home and fell into worse. Jack's hands clenched. Morrison took a special interest in her, the kind that leaves bruises, the kind that breaks spirits along with bones. Jack! She tried to run. Morrison caught her, decided to make an example, was fixing to actually brand her like cattle. When I intervened, you killed him. I stopped him. He pulled a gun. I was faster. Jack met her eyes steadily. Yes, I killed Samuel Morrison. Shot him dead in his own brothel while his men watched. Then I got Annie on a stage to San Francisco with enough money to start over, and I ran. Sarah absorbed this, the storm howling around them like judgment. The law belonged to Morrison. His brother's the judge. His cousin runs the bank. Justice and law aren't always the same thing. Sarah, you've lived long enough to know that. She did know. Hadn't she seen justice denied too many times women trapped in brutal marriages because the law said they belonged to their husbands? Children worked to death because the law allowed it. The powerful taking what they wanted while the powerless endured. I'm not asking for absolution, Jack continued. I'd do it again. That makes me a killer in the eyes of your God and your town. Question is, what does it make me in your eyes? Sarah rose and crossed to him, framing his face with her hands. It makes you the man who saved a child, who chose justice over law, who carries the weight of that choice every day. Something broke in his expression. Sarah? Kiss me. You don't know what you're asking. I'm asking the man I trust, killer or not, to stop treating me like glass. She pressed closer. I'm not pure. Jack, I'm not fragile. I'm a woman who knows darkness exists and chooses light anyway. Choose with me. He made a sound like surrender and pulled her against him. This kiss was different from the first. Desperate, seeking, tinged with sorrow and need. Sarah met him passion for passion, pouring her acceptance, her understanding, her own desperate hunger into the contact. The storm raged outside, but inside the makeshift shelter, another storm was building. Jack's hands tangled in her hair, pins scattering. Sarah's shawl fell unheeded as she pressed closer, needing to erase the distance between them. Sarah, he groaned against her lips. We should stop. No more shoulds. She pulled back to look at him, her hair wild, her eyes blazing. I've lived my whole life by shoulds. Tonight, I want— What do you want? To feel alive in my skin instead of watching life from behind glass. She took his hand, placed it over her racing heart. To know what it means to choose joy over duty, even if just once. Jack's control visibly frayed. If we do this, then we do it. Sarah smiled, fierce and free. The widow McKenna is already ruined in their eyes just for defending you. Let her be ruined in truth. He searched her face, then made his decision. His mouth found hers again, hungry and demanding. Sarah met him eagerly, her body singing with possibilities she'd only dreamed. They moved together to his bedroll, hands exploring, boundaries dissolving. Jack worshiped her with touches that spoke of reverence and desire combined. Sarah arched beneath him, shameless in her pleasure, crying out when he found sensitive places she hadn't known existed. When they finally joined, it was with a sense of coming home to a place neither had known they'd been searching for. Sarah wept at the sweetness of it, at the care he took, at the way he watched her face like she was precious beyond measure. After, they lay entwined while the storm gradually died outside. Sarah traced patterns on Jack's chest, marveling at the freedom to touch, to be touched, to exist as a creature of flesh and desire. No regrets, Jack asked softly. None. She pressed a kiss to his shoulder. For the first time in my life, I did something purely because I wanted to. How could I regret that? Your reputation was a prison. She propped herself up to look at him. I've been the perfect widow, the perfect wife before that. Perfect is another word for dead. You brought me back to life. Jack, that's worth any amount of scandal. He pulled her down for another kiss, gentle this time. What happens now? Now, Sarah settled against him, feeling complete for the first time in memory. Now we face whatever comes, together. If you'll have me. Have you? Jack laughed, low and rough. Woman, I'd take you anywhere, show you everything, give you the whole wide world if I could. I don't need the whole world, Sarah said, just the freedom to explore it. They talked through the night, making plans and discarding them, dreaming possibilities into being. When dawn broke clear and bright, the storm passed. Sarah knew there would be no returning to her old life. The widow McKenna had died in that storm, in Jack's arms, in the choosing. What emerged was something new, not respectable, not proper, but real. A woman who'd tasted freedom and found it sweeter than safety. A woman who'd chosen a killer's love over a town's approval and counted it a fair trade. I should go, she said as the sun climbed. Face whatever waits. We could leave now, Jack offered. Saddle up and ride before they know you're gone. Sarah considered, then shook her head. No, I won't slink away like a thief. Let them see what their judgment has wrought. Let them know I choose this. Jack smiled, proud and sad at once. Brave words. Hope you mean them. I do. She kissed him once more, drawing strength from the contact. Whatever comes, I regret nothing. Remember that. Sarah walked back through town with her head high, dust-stained and disheveled, wearing her ruin-like armor. Let them look, let them whisper. She'd found something worth more than their approval herself, complete and unashamed. The storm had passed, but its effects remained. In its wake, everything looked different, cleaner, transformed. Just like her, just like the life she was choosing. One scandalous, glorious moment at a time. The reckoning came swift as a rattlesnake strike. Sarah had barely changed out of her dust-stained dress when the knock thundered through her small house. She opened the door to find Martha Whitmore flanked by 4 other church women, their faces set in masks of righteous fury. "We need to speak with you," Martha announced, pushing past without invitation. The women arranged themselves in Sarah's parlor like a tribunal. Constance Harper clutched her Bible like a weapon. Elizabeth Morrison, the banker's wife, looked torn between scandal and sympathy. The others radiated disapproval like heat from a stove. "You were seen," Martha began without preamble, "leaving that drifter's camp at dawn, disheveled, compromised." Sarah stood before them, chin raised, and the single word seemed to shock them more than any denial would have. Martha's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. "And," Constance sputtered, "you stand there, reeking of sin, and say, 'and.' I say what difference it makes to any of you how I conduct my private life." "Private," Martha found her voice. "Nothing is private when it reflects on the church, on your dear husband's memory, on all decent women of this town." "Thomas is dead," Sarah said flatly. "His memory can't be hurt by my choices." "Blasphemy," someone whispered. "Truth," Sarah countered. "Something this town seems allergic to." Martha stood, drawing herself up to her full height. "Sarah McKenna, you have brought shame upon yourself and all who associated with you. That man is a killer." "That man saved a child from torture," Sarah interrupted, "which is more than any of us righteous folk have done. You defend him after he's ruined you." "I ruined myself, gladly, with full knowledge and intent." Sarah smiled at their horrified faces. "What ruins is living by other people's rules. I've done that my whole life. I'm finished." "Then you're finished with us," Martha declared. "You are no longer welcome at church functions. The aid the congregation provides to you as a widow will cease. You will find no friend among decent people." "Decent people," Sarah repeated. "Tell me, Martha, what's decent about turning your back on a woman for the crime of being human? What's Christian about casting stones?" "Don't you dare quote scripture at us," Constance hissed. "Not with his smell still on you." "His smell?" Sarah laughed, wild and free. "You mean the smell of honest work, of leather and sunshine and freedom? Yes, I carry his scent, and I'm not ashamed. It's better than the stink of hypocrisy you're wearing." Elizabeth Morrison spoke up quietly. "Sarah, think what you're doing. Apologize. Ask forgiveness. We could say you were led astray by grief." "I was led astray by nothing but my own desires," Sarah said firmly. "And I'll apologize for nothing except wasting years trying to be what you wanted instead of who I am." "Then you've made your choice," Martha said coldly. "You'll leave this house by week's end. It belongs to the church. Your widow's fund is hereby terminated. And if you have any decency left, you'll leave Redemption Creek entirely." "Decency," Sarah mused. "You keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means." The women filed out in a flurry of black bombazine and judgment. At the door, Elizabeth paused, glancing back. "I hope he's worth it," she whispered. "He is," Sarah replied. "But more importantly, I'm worth it." Alone, Sarah sank into a chair, the reality of her situation crashing over her. No home, no income, no community. She'd known it would come to this, but knowing and experiencing were different things. She thought of Jack's offer to leave immediately, and wondered if she'd been foolish to refuse. Pride, perhaps, or the need to face her choices head-on instead of running. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find Dr. Nathaniel Green, the town's elderly physician. His kind face showed concern rather than condemnation. "May I come in, my dear?" Sarah stepped aside. "If you're here to lecture me about virtue, Doctor, I'm here as a friend." He settled his aging frame into a chair. "And to warn you, this situation with the church ladies is just the beginning. There's talk among some of the men, ugly talk." "About Jack?" "About both of you. That telegram from El Paso has them worked up. Add your liaison, and they're talking about running him out. Or worse." Sarah's blood chilled. "They wouldn't dare." "Sarah, I've lived in frontier towns for 40 years. I've seen what mobs do when they think their moral order's threatened." He leaned forward earnestly. "Morrison has business partners here. Men who won't look kindly on someone who killed him. Justified or not. You believe Jack was justified?" "Dr." Green smiled sadly. "I've treated too many young girls who've crossed paths with men like Morrison. If your Jack stopped him from harming another child, then he did what the law should have done. The law belongs to men like Morrison, which is why men like your Jack become outlaws, and why women like you become outcasts." He pulled an envelope from his coat. "This is a letter of introduction to a colleague in Denver. If you need to leave quickly, he'll help you get established." Sarah took the envelope with trembling hands. "Why are you helping me?" "Because I knew your husband, child. Thomas was a good man in his way, but he was cold as winter ground. I watched you shrivel beside him, trying to be the wife he needed instead of the woman you were." He patted her hand gently. "If you've found someone who sees you truly, then hold fast. Love like that comes rarely." After the doctor left, Sarah moved through her house like a sleepwalker, seeing it clearly for the first time. Every corner spoke of duty, of conformity, of a life lived in shades of gray. She'd been a ghost haunting these rooms, and only now, facing exile, did she feel solid and real. Evening brought new challenges. Sarah had ventured to the general store for supplies, only to have Jameson refuse her service. "Can't do business with you," he'd said, not meeting her eyes. "Wife's orders." It was the same at the bakery, the seamstress, even the water well where women gathered. Sarah found herself invisible, a pariah in the town she'd served faithfully for years. She was drawing water from her own rain barrel when Jack appeared, materializing from shadows like he'd done that first night in the church. "You should be more careful," she said. "They're watching for you." "Let them watch." He took the bucket from her hands. "I heard what happened with the church women." "News travels fast." "Sarah." He caught her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. "We can leave tonight, right now. I've got money saved, enough to get us somewhere safe." "Running again." "Sometimes running's the smart choice." Sarah covered his hand with hers. "I won't be forced out like a thief. They want me gone fine, but on my terms, in my time." "Stubborn woman." "You knew that when you kissed me." He pulled her close, and she melted into his strength. "I'm sorry for bringing this on you. You brought nothing but truth." She looked up at him, fierce and sure. "I'd rather live one day free than a lifetime in chains. No apologies." They were interrupted by the sound of horses. Jack tensed, hand moving to his gun, but Sarah recognized Dr. Green's buggy. The doctor climbed down, his face grave. "Sheriff Thompson's been called away to Carson City. Convenient timing. There's talk of a delegation visiting you tomorrow night. Jack, the kind that brings rope." "I'll let them come," Jack said coldly. "Don't be a fool, son. You can't fight the whole town." "I can try." "And get Sarah killed in the crossfire, Doctor." Green shook his head. "Pride's a luxury neither of you can afford right now." Sarah felt Jack's body coil with tension. She knew that pride, that refusal to bow or bend. It was part of what had drawn her to him. But the doctor was right. He's right, she said quietly. We need to be smart. Jack looked down at her, conflict clear in his face. I won't run from a fight. This isn't about fighting. It's about living, about having a future together. She touched his face. Please, for me. The moment stretched taut before Jack finally nodded. What do you suggest, Doc? Leave tomorrow. Early. I'll spread word that you've already gone, that I saw you riding out at dawn. Might buy you time. He looked between them. Both of you, together or separate, but go. After the doctor left, Sarah and Jack stood in the gathering darkness, the weight of decision heavy between them. I need the night, Sarah said, to pack, to say goodbye. Sarah, one more night in my own bed, one more dawn in this place. That's all. She managed a smile. Then we'll go wherever the wind takes us. Jack kissed her, soft and sweet. I'll be ready. First light. First light, she agreed. That night, Sarah moved through her house with purpose. She packed light a few dresses, her mother's silver brush, the wooden bird Jack had carved. Everything else she left in neat order. A life abandoned but not destroyed. At Thomas's desk, she penned a letter to Reverend Matthews, formally relinquishing any claim to church property. She left instructions for her few possessions to be distributed among the poor. No one would say she left in disorder or debt. Finally, she removed her wedding ring. The gold band had worn a groove in her finger over the years, marking her as possessed, owned, defined by another. She set it on Thomas's Bible, a final offering to the life she was leaving behind. In the pre-dawn darkness, Sarah dressed in her simplest clothes, a brown traveling dress she'd worn before marriage. It felt strange after so much black, like shedding mourning for her own past life. She took one last look around the house that had been her prison and her shelter. Then she walked out, closing the door firmly behind her. No looking back, no regrets. Jack waited at the edge of town with 2 horses and a pack mule. He smiled when he saw her, and in that smile, Sarah saw her future, uncertain, possibly dangerous, but hers to shape. Ready. Sarah mounted the mare, settling into the saddle like she'd been born to it. I've been ready my whole life, just didn't know it until now. As the sun crested the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and possibility, they rode out together. Behind them, Redemption Creek slept on, secure in its small prejudices and smaller mercies. Ahead stretched the vast unknown, terrible and beautiful in its freedom. Sarah didn't look back. There was nothing there for her now but the ghost of a woman who'd tried so hard to be good that she'd forgotten to be alive. That woman was dead, buried in the ashes of reputation and respectability. What rode toward the sunrise was someone new, not the preacher's widow, not the fallen woman, but simply Sarah, a woman who'd chosen love over safety, truth over comfort, and freedom over all. The road stretched endless before them, and for the first time in her life, Sarah greeted that endlessness with joy. They'd barely cleared the rise outside town when the dust cloud appeared behind them. Jack spotted it first, pulling up short with a muttered curse. Company, he said tersely, riding hard. Sarah's heart sank. They'd waited too long, let pride delay wisdom. How many? 8, maybe 10. Jack's hand moved to his rifle. You ride on. I'll slow them down. No. Sarah wheeled her horse around. We face this together or not at all. Damn it, Sarah! No arguments. I chose this path. I'll ride it to the end. The riders came into view. A delegation of Redemption Creek's finest citizens, armed with righteous fury and rope. Sarah recognized Wilson Harper at the lead, Constance's husband, his face twisted with the particular rage of small men given excuse for violence. That's far enough, Jack called out, positioning himself between Sarah and the mob. The men reined up in a semicircle, dust settling around them like smoke. Harper spoke for the group, his voice carrying the authority of accumulated spite. "I, Jack Corian. You're wanted for murder in El Paso. We're making a citizen's arrest." "With rope." Jack nodded toward the coils visible on several saddles. "That's not arrest, that's lynching." "Murderers don't deserve better," spat Clayton Moore, the bank manager. "Especially ones who corrupt decent women." Sarah urged her horse forward. "I corrupted myself, Mr. Moore, or perhaps I finally stopped pretending corruption was virtue." "Shut your mouth, harlot," Harper snarled. "You've lost the right to speak among decent folk." "Decent?" Jack laughed, cold as winter wind. "You keep using that word. Tell me, what's decent about 10 armed men hunting 2 people? What's decent about the lynch mob? You're pretending isn't a lynch mob." "We're upholding the law." "You're upholding your wounded pride." Sarah's voice cut sharp. "A woman chose her own path instead of the one you mapped for her. That's what really bothers you. Isn't it not Jack's past, but my present?" "Enough talk," growled Josiah Mills from the back. "String him up and have done." The mob surged forward. Jack's gun cleared leather faster than thought, the shot splitting the morning air. Harper's hat flew off, and the man himself nearly followed, yanking his horse back so hard it reared. "The next one goes through something more vital than a hat." Jack said calmly, "I've got 6 shots, and I don't miss. Question is, which 6 of you are ready to die for the honor of Redemption Creek?" The mob hesitated, suddenly faced with the mathematics of violence. It was easier to hang a man who didn't fight back, who accepted the mob's version of justice. Jack Corian clearly had other ideas. "You can't kill us all," Harper said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "No, but I can kill you first." Jack's gun never wavered. "And probably more there, maybe Mills. The rest of you might get me, but those 3 will be feeding buzzards. Worth it." Sarah watched the mob's resolve waver. These were shopkeepers and ranchers, not gunfighters. They'd expected easy prey, not a man willing to die on his feet rather than from a rope. Then she heard it, more hoofbeats, approaching fast. Her heart sank further. Reinforcements would tip the balance, make Jack's arithmetic of violence meaningless. But the rider who crested the hill wasn't from Redemption Creek. Sheriff Thompson, dusty from hard riding, surveyed the scene with the weary eye of a lawman who'd seen too many near lynchings. "Gentlemen," he said mildly, "seems I got back from Carson City just in time." "Sheriff," Harper blustered, "we were just—" "About to commit murder on my watch." Thompson rode between the mob and their intended victims. "I think not. You boys head on home." "But he's wanted in El Paso, which last I checked isn't in my jurisdiction. Man hasn't committed any crimes in Redemption Creek." The sheriff's eyes were hard as flint. "Unless you count the crime of making some of you look foolish, which ain't actually illegal." "He despoiled the widow McKenna." "Did he now?" Thompson looked at Sarah. "Ma'am, were you despoiled against your will?" "Everything I did was my choice. Sheriff enthusiastically consented to—" Someone in the mob made a disgusted sound. Thompson ignored it. "Well then, seems like what we have here is hurt feelings, not criminal activity. Now disperse, or I'll arrest the lot of you for attempted murder." The mob milled uncertainly. Harper made one last attempt. "Sheriff, you can't just let them go." "Watch me." Thompson's hand rested on his gun. "And Harper, that rope on your saddle better be for ranch work. I see it used for anything else. You'll find out how the territorial prison feels about lynching." Slowly, reluctantly, the mob turned their horses back toward town. Harper shot one last venomous look at Sarah and Jack. "This isn't over," he promised. "Yes, it is," Thompson said firmly. "Anyone who pursues these folks beyond this point answers to me. And I promise you, I'm a lot less forgiving than Jack here." After the mob disappeared over the rise, Thompson turned to Jack and Sarah. "That was stupid, sticking around. You know I can't protect you forever." "We were leaving," Sarah said. They caught up. Leave faster next time. The sheriff tipped his hat. I'll hold them off long as I can. But Harper's right about one thing. There's paper on you from El Paso. Jack, stay clear of Texas and anywhere else Morrison had friends. Appreciate the warning, Jack said. Thompson studied them both. For what it's worth, I knew Sam Morrison. World's better off without him, but the law doesn't see it that way. So you'd best keep moving. He wheeled his horse around and headed back to town without another word. Sarah and Jack sat in the morning quiet, the interrupted violence still hanging in the air like gunpowder. That was close, Sarah said finally. Too close. Jack holstered his gun. We need distance. Fast. They rode hard through the day, stopping only to water the horses. By evening, Redemption Creek was just a memory on the horizon. They made camp in a box canyon, hidden from casual view. As Sarah tended the fire, Jack sat sharpening his knife, the rhythmic sound soothing after the day's chaos. You could have been killed, he said quietly. Should have ridden on when I told you. And you could have been lynched. Should have left town days ago when the rumors started. She sat beside him, leaning into his warmth. We both made choices. No use second-guessing them now. I'm used to danger. It's been my companion for years. But you... He set down the knife, pulling her close. I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of me. Nothing happened to me because of you. Everything happened because of me, my choices, my desires, my refusal to keep playing a role I'd outgrown. She tilted his face toward hers. You didn't ruin me, Jack. You revealed me, to myself most of all. He kissed her then, tender and fierce at once. When they parted, Sarah saw moisture in his eyes. I don't deserve you, he said roughly. Deserve's got nothing to do with it. We choose each other. That's enough. That night, under stars unmarred by town lights, they spoke of the future, the letter from Doctor. Green promised possibilities in Denver, a growing city where past sins might matter less than present industry. Jack had money saved, enough to start fresh. Sarah had skills, even if they were domestic ones. We could say we're married, Jack suggested. Make things easier. We could, Sarah agreed. Though I'm in no hurry to wear another wedding ring. Let's see who we become first, without roles to play. Fair enough, though people will talk. Let them. I'm done living for other people's opinions. They made love under the stars, christening their new life with passion that would have horrified Redemption Creek. Sarah reveled in the freedom of it, in the way her body sang under Jack's touch, in the rightness of choosing pleasure over propriety. Afterward, lying tangled in blankets while coyotes called in the distance, Sarah thought about the mob, about Harper's rage and the rope they'd brought. She should be terrified, should regret the choices that led to this moment of exile and danger. Instead, she felt only wild gratitude. For Jack, yes, but more for herself, for the woman who'd finally chosen to live authentically. Whatever the cost, that woman had faced down a lynch mob and survived, had claimed her desires without apology, had traded the safety of a cage for the uncertainty of flight. What are you thinking? Jack asked, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. That Mary Whitmore was wrong. I haven't lost the right to speak among decent folk. Sarah smiled in the darkness. I've gained the right to decide for myself what decency means. And what does it mean? Honesty, courage, choosing love over fear, standing by your choices even when they cost everything. She turned in his arms. You're the most decent man I've ever known. Jack Corian, whatever the law says. The law. The law protected Morrison while he hurt children. The law would have kept me married to a man who saw me as furniture. The law would have hanged you for saving Annie. She kissed him fiercely. To hell with the law. We'll make our own. Jack laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. Spoken like a true outlaw. Is that what I am now, an outlaw? The best kind. the kind that outlaws injustice itself. They talked until dawn, making plans and discarding them, dreaming possibilities into being. Denver first, perhaps, then maybe California, where gold had made anything possible, or north to Oregon, where land was cheap and the past mattered less than the future. As the sun rose, painting the desert in shades of gold and promise, Sarah felt the last chains of her old life fall away. Behind them lay Redemption Creek with its small mines and smaller mercies. Ahead lay the whole wide world, terrible and beautiful in its freedom. She'd lost everything society said mattered: reputation, security, community approval, but she'd gained something worth more than all of that combined herself, complete and unashamed, riding toward whatever future she chose to create. The transformation was complete. The preacher's widow was dead, buried in the dust of a life that never truly fit. What rode toward the sunrise was someone entirely new. Sarah the outlaw, the free woman, the soul who'd chosen authenticity over acceptance and counted it the best bargain she'd ever made. The fire crackled between them as darkness settled over the desert. They'd made camp in a grove of juniper trees, far from any trail. The horses picketed nearby. Sarah had cooked beans and biscuits over the flames while Jack tended the animals, their movements synchronized by days of travel together. Now they sat close, sharing coffee from a single cup. The intimacy of the gesture more meaningful than any wedding vow Sarah had ever spoken. "Tell me," she said quietly, "about before Mary, about the man you were." Jack stared into the fire, his profile etched sharp by flame light. "Not much to tell. Son of a schoolteacher and a clerk. Grew up in Philadelphia, if you can believe it." Philadelphia, Sarah couldn't hide her surprise. "You're a long way from there." "In more ways than distance." He took the cup, sipped thoughtfully. "My father wanted me to follow his path. Safe job, safe life, safe dreams. I tried. God knows I tried. Worked in a bank, wore a suit, pretended the walls weren't closing in." "What changed?" "Met a man named Samuel Bridger, old mountain man who'd come east to die. Ended up living next door. He'd sit on his porch telling stories about the West, about skies so big they swallowed you whole, about freedom that went bone deep." Jack smiled at the memory. "My father called him a liar and a drunk. Maybe he was, but his lies were truer than anything in my ledger books." "So you left?" "The day after my 21st birthday, took my savings, bought a horse and a gun, pointed myself west. My parents never forgave me." His voice held old pain. "Got one letter from my mother before she died. Said I'd broken their hearts." Sarah took his hand. "Hearts break from too much pressure as easy as too little. You had to breathe." "That's what Mary said." Jack's grip tightened. "Met her in Amarillo when I was green as spring grass. She was working in her uncle's store. Had a laugh like church bells. I took one look and forgot every caution Bridger taught me." "You loved her." "With everything I had, which turned out not to be enough." He released Sarah's hand to poke at the fire. "I thought I could give her the life she deserved. Bought land. Built a house with my own hands. Planned a future as solid as any Philadelphia banker's. But the West doesn't care about plans. The drought? 3 years without real rain. Watched the grass die, the cattle die, the dream die inch by inch. Mary never complained. Never said a word about the dresses she couldn't have or the trips we couldn't take. She just got quieter, like she was fading along with everything else." Sarah understood that fading. How many times had she felt herself disappearing beside Thomas, becoming transparent as glass? "When she took sick, I sold everything. Land, horses, my grandfather's watch. Still wasn't enough for the medicine that might have saved her." Jack's voice went flat. "She died thinking she was a burden. Last words were, 'I'm sorry,' like any of it was her fault." Jack. "After that, walls felt like coffins, towns felt like traps. I started moving and couldn't stop. Every place I stayed too long, I'd hear her apologizing." He looked at Sarah then. eyes bright with unshed tears. "Until Redemption Creek. Until you—" Why was I different? Because you were already a ghost, living but not alive, going through motions in someone else's life. He touched her face gently. I recognized the look. It was like seeing myself in a dress. Sarah laughed despite the tears on her cheeks. "What a pair we make. Two ghosts trying to remember how to be solid." "We're solid now." Jack pulled her against him. "Real as this fire, this night, this choice we've made." "Tell me about El Paso." Sarah said, "I know the facts, but I want to know how it felt." Jack was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Dirty. That's what I remember most. Not the blood or the fear, but how dirty I felt after, like I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross." "Do you regret it?" "No, but that doesn't make it clean." He stared at his hands. "Morrison was evil, no question. What he did to those girls. Annie wasn't the first or the youngest, but when I shot him, I wasn't thinking about justice. I was thinking about Mary, about every powerful man who takes what he wants while the weak suffer. I killed him for all of them, and that makes it personal, not righteous. Maybe righteousness is personal. Maybe real justice always is." Thomas wouldn't have agreed. Sarah's laugh was bitter. "Thomas preached about sin while ignoring the suffering next door. He'd have counseled those girls to pray for their abusers' souls while their bodies were broken." She turned to face Jack fully. "You acted. That matters more than any sermon." "The law doesn't see it that way." "We've covered what I think of the law." Sarah took his hands, feeling the calluses, the strength, the gentleness capable of violence when violence was needed. "I need to tell you something. About Thomas, about our marriage." "You don't owe me explanations." "This isn't about owing. It's about truth between us." Sarah gathered her courage. "Everyone thought we had a perfect marriage, the young preacher and his devoted wife, but Thomas, he had particular ideas about marriage, about a wife's duties." Jack's hands tightened on hers, understanding dawning in his eyes. "He never hit me," Sarah continued, "never raised his voice, but he had ways of making his disappointment known. Cold silences that lasted weeks, scripture quoted like weapons, and in our bed," she stopped, searching for words. "You don't have to. I want to, need to." Sarah drew a breath. "He treated marital relations like a sacrament I was failing to appreciate. Quick, silent, with lectures after about my lack of proper submission. I'd lie there feeling like a grave being filled with dirt." "Sarah." Jack's voice was rough with suppressed rage. "I tried to be what he wanted. Prayed for the feelings a wife should have. Blamed myself for the coldness between us. When he died, everyone said how tragic it was, but all I felt was relief." She met Jack's eyes. "What kind of woman feels relief when her husband dies?" "The kind who was dying herself and finally got to stop." Jack pulled her into his arms. "There's more than one way to kill a person. Sarah, Thomas was killing you slow, with scripture and disappointment and those cold silences. That's its own kind of evil. The town wouldn't see it that way. The town can go to hell." He pulled back to look at her. "You survived. That's what matters, and now you're free." "Am I? Sometimes I still hear his voice in my head, telling me I'm wanton, sinful, bound for damnation." "What do you tell him?" Sarah smiled, fierce and bright. "That I'd rather be honestly damned than falsely saved. That every moment with you is worth a lifetime of his heaven." Jack kissed her then, deep and claiming, erasing Thomas's ghost with present fire. When they parted, both breathing hard, he said, "We make our own heaven. Sarah, here, now, in choosing each other despite everything." A heaven built on sin, the preachers would say. Built on truth, on freedom, on the wild glory of being exactly who we are. He stood, pulling her up with him. "Dance with me. Here now there's no music. Listen closer." Sarah did, and heard it, the night sounds of the desert. Wind in juniper branches. Coyotes calling. The horses shifting and sighing. The fire crackling its ancient rhythm. Music older than churches, wider than walls. They danced in the firelight. No steps to follow. No propriety to maintain. Sarah felt her body remember itself. Felt grace return to limbs too long held rigid. Jack moved with her. Around her. The dance becoming a conversation without words. "I love you," she said suddenly, the words escaping like birds from a cage. Jack stopped moving, his eyes searching hers. "Sarah!" "I know it's too soon, too much, but I've spent years swallowing words, choking on feelings unexpressed. I won't do it anymore." She touched his face. "I love you, Jack Corian, not because you saved me, but because you saw me, because you make me want to be brave enough for this life we're choosing. You are brave enough, braver than me most days." He rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too. Have since that night in the church when you said righteousness was cold comfort. Nobody had ever spoken that kind of truth in a holy place before. Blasphemous to the end, honest to the beginning." He spun her once more, laughing. "What a scandal we are. The murdering drifter and the wanton widow. Dancing under stars that don't care about our sins." "Former widow," Sarah corrected. "Now I'm just a woman in love with a complicated man, heading toward an uncertain future with more hope than fear." They danced until the fire burned low, then made love on their blankets with the sky as witness. Sarah reveled in the freedom of it, in the way her body sang hosannas more holy than any hymn. This was worship. She thought, this meeting of souls choosing joy despite sorrow, pleasure despite pain, love despite all the reasons not to. Later, wrapped in each other in rough wool, they planned their next moves. Denver still seemed best large enough to disappear in, knew enough that everyone was from somewhere else. Jack had enough money saved for a start. Sarah could take in sewing, maybe teach children their letters. Simple plans for a simple life. "Will it be enough?" Jack asked. "After all this drama? Can you be happy with ordinary days?" "Ordinary days with you sound extraordinary." Sarah traced patterns on his chest. "Besides, I've had enough drama for a lifetime. Peace sounds like paradise." "We'll have to be careful. Morrison's reach was long. There might be men looking for me, even in Denver." "Then we'll be careful. Change names if we have to." "You'd do that, give up even your name?" Sarah considered. Sarah McKenna, widow, property, defined by the man she'd married. The name had never truly been hers. "Sarah died in Redemption Creek," she said finally. "I'll choose something new, something that fits who I'm becoming." "Any ideas?" "Grace," she said impulsively. "Grace Wheeler. For the grace I've found and the wheels taking us forward." "Grace and Jack Wheeler. Then, if anyone asks, we're married 2 years, heading to Denver from California." "Why California?" "Because it's far from Texas and explains the sun on our faces." Jack kissed her forehead. "We'll need practice, story straight, details consistent." "Like outlaws." "Exactly like outlaws. The best kind, outlawing the past itself." They talked until dawn, building their new identities like a house of words. By the time the sun rose, Sarah McKenna and Jack Corian were already fading, replaced by Grace and Jack Wheeler, ordinary folks seeking ordinary happiness in a city that didn't care who you used to be. The transformation felt like shedding skin, painful and necessary and utterly liberating. Sarah took her wedding ring from her pack, the last remnant of her old life. "What should I do with this?" Jack considered. "Sell it in the next town. Use the money for your new start." "Our new start." "Ours," he agreed. Sarah held the ring up to the morning light. Such a small thing to have bound her so completely. She thought of Thomas, of the years spent trying to fill a role that never fit. No anger now, just sadness for the woman she'd been and relief for the woman she was becoming. "Goodbye, Thomas," she said softly. "I hope you found the righteousness you sought. I've found something better." She tucked the ring away and turned to Jack. Her choice, her chance, her co-conspirator in the crime of authentic living. "Ready to go, Mrs. Wheeler." "Ready, Mr. Wheeler." They broke camp as the sun climbed, erasing all traces of their presence. Two ghosts becoming solid, two outcasts becoming family, two souls choosing love over every sensible objection. The desert stretched before them, vast and unforgiving and absolutely beautiful. Sarah breathed deep, tasting freedom on her tongue like water after drought. Whatever came next, she would meet it as herself. Not the preacher's widow, not the fallen woman, just Grace Wheeler, alive and in love and finally, fully, free. The morning sun painted Redemption Creek in shades of gold and dust as Sarah stood in the doorway of the house that had never truly been home. Her few possessions were packed, her decisions made, her old life ready to be shed like an outgrown skin. She moved through the rooms one final time, not from sentiment, but from a need to witness her own transformation. Here, the kitchen where she'd prepared countless meals in dutiful silence. There, the parlor where churchwomen had sat in judgment, their righteousness as stifling as summer heat. And upstairs, the bedroom where she'd lain beside Thomas. Two strangers sharing a bed but never truly touching. At Thomas's grave behind the church. Sarah paused. The headstone read, "A righteous man," the town's final verdict on a life lived by rules rather than love. "You tried to make me in your image," she said quietly. "A reflection of what you thought godly women should be. But I was never meant for your kind of heaven. Thomas, I hope you found peace. I know I'm about to." She placed a small wildflower on the grave. Not from grief, but from closure. Then she walked away without looking back. Jack waited at the edge of town with the horses, just as they'd planned. He'd traded his distinctive roan for a less memorable bay, and dressed in clothes that spoke of honest work rather than gunfighter's pride. The transformation was remarkable, from dangerous drifter to ordinary traveler with a few subtle changes. "Last chance," he said as she approached. "We leave now. We leave it all. No coming back." Sarah looked once more at Redemption Creek, at the church spire piercing the morning sky, at the houses of people who'd rather see her righteous than happy, at the life that had fit like a noose around her neck. "I've been gone for years," she said. "My body just hadn't caught up until now." She mounted her horse with practiced ease, no longer the woman who'd been shocked by riding astride just days ago. Jack smiled at her transformation. "You sit that saddle like you were born to it." "Maybe I was. Maybe we're all born to freedom and spend our lives forgetting." She adjusted her hat, a practical thing, not the elaborate bonnets of her widowhood. "Where to first?" "North to Millbrook. Can sell your ring there. Pick up supplies." He studied her face. "You sure about the ring?" Sarah pulled it from her pocket, the gold band catching light like a tiny shackle. "It bought my prison. Let it buy my freedom." They rode out as the town began to stir, passing the general store where Jameson was sweeping his porch. He saw them but turned away, unwilling to acknowledge the fallen woman and her corruption. Sarah felt his dismissal like a gift. To be unseen by those who'd watched her so closely was its own liberation. The miles stretched before them, each one loosening the bonds of who they'd been. They rode in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from understanding rather than awkwardness. When they stopped to rest the horses, Jack taught her how to read trail signs, how to find water in dry country, how to move through the land like she belonged to it rather than the other way round. "You're a quick study," he said as she correctly identified tracks left by a passing deer. "I've been studying my whole life. Just finally found something worth learning." She stood, dusting off her skirts. "Teach me to shoot." "Sarah—" "Grace," she corrected gently. "Sarah's gone, and Grace needs to know how to defend herself in this new life. Jack considered, then pulled his revolver. Fair enough, but we start with safety. Gun's always loaded, even when it's not. Never point at anything you don't mean to destroy. And never ever touch that trigger unless you're ready for what comes after. She took the weapon, surprised by its weight. Like choices. Exactly like choices. Once made, can't be unmade. He showed her how to hold it, how to sight, how to squeeze rather than pull. Her first shots went wild, but she had steady hands and stubborn determination. By the 6th round, she was hitting the makeshift target more often than not. Natural born, Jack said with pride, though I hope you never need to use it for real. Better to have the choice than not. She handed the gun back carefully. Like everything else in this life we're building. Millbrook appeared by late afternoon, larger than Redemption Creek but small enough not to ask questions. The jeweler barely glanced at Sarah when she sold the ring, too used to women trading gold for freedom to find it remarkable. The amount was modest, but enough. A stake in their new beginning. They resupplied quickly. Sarah marveling at the simple pleasure of buying goods without judgment. New clothes to replace her widow's weeds. Practical dresses in brown and blue. Sturdy boots, a coat for mountain weather. Each purchase felt like claiming pieces of her new self. We'll push on after dark, Jack said. Make camp outside town limits. But as they prepared to leave, a commotion drew their attention. A young woman, barely more than a girl, was being dragged from the saloon by a man twice her size. Please, she cried. I don't want to. You'll do as you're told, the man snarled. Paid good money for you. Sarah's blood turned to ice. She knew that desperation, that trapped helplessness. Before Jack could stop her, she was striding across the street. Let her go. The man turned, his piggish eyes taking in Sarah's traveling clothes and dismissing her. Mind your business. Woman! I am minding it. Release her. Or what? He laughed, ugly and confident. You'll pray at me. Sarah felt rather than saw Jack move up beside her. The man's laughter died as he registered the threat. Or we'll have a problem, Jack said quietly. No law against a man claiming what he's bought, the man blustered. No law against me objecting either. Jack's hand rested easy on his gun. Question is, how much is she worth to you, because I guarantee it ain't worth what comes next. A crowd had gathered, drawn by the promise of violence. The man looked around, seeking support that didn't come. Frontier towns had little love for men who forced women, even fallen ones. Ain't worth the trouble, he finally muttered, shoving the girl away. Plenty more where she came from. He stomped off, spitting in the dust. The girl collapsed, shaking. Sarah knelt beside her, recognizing the hollowness in young eyes that had seen too much. What's your name? Lucy Morrison. Sarah's breath caught. Morrison. My uncle was Samuel Morrison, in El Paso. The girl's voice was barely a whisper. When he died, his establishment closed. I had nowhere else. Sarah looked at Jack, seeing her own thoughts reflected in his eyes. This was the consequence of good intentions. A girl saved only to fall into different hands. How much do you owe? Sarah asked. $20 for travel here. Clothes, food. Sarah pulled the money from selling her ring. More than enough. You're free. Debt's paid. Lucy stared at the bills like she'd never seen currency before. I don't understand. Someone helped you once before, in El Paso. Call this the second installment. Sarah pressed the money into the girl's hands. There's enough there for stage fare anywhere you want to go. Start fresh. Be whoever you want. Why? Sarah smiled, remembering her own transformation. Because everyone deserves the chance to choose their own life, even especially women the world's written off. Lucy clutched the money, tears streaming. I don't even know your name. Grace Wheeler, and that's Jack Wheeler. Remember us, if you like. Or forget. If that serves better, just remember you're free." They left Lucy at the stage depot, purchasing a ticket to San Francisco, where a girl could disappear into better possibilities. As they rode out of Millbrook, Jack was quiet. That was risky. He finally said, drawing attention. "That was necessary?" Sarah countered. "We couldn't save her just to let her fall again." "We can't save them all." "No, but we saved one. That matters." She looked at him sideways. "Besides, aren't we outlaws? Isn't helping people escape their prisons what outlaws do?" Jack laughed, the tension breaking. "When you put it that way." They made camp in a meadow where wildflowers grew thick as hope. As Sarah prepared their simple meal, she thought about Lucy Morrison, about Annie in El Paso, about all the women trapped in lives that weren't living. She'd escaped. They'd helped 2 others escape. Small victories against a world that preferred women caged. "No regrets?" Jack asked as they sat by the fire. "None." Sarah leaned into his warmth. "That money bought more than I dreamed. My freedom and someone else's. Thomas would call it waste. I call it the best bargain I ever made." The preacher's widow would never have intervened like that. The preacher's widow was too busy being dead to help anyone else live. Sarah smiled at the stars beginning to emerge. Grace Wheeler, on the other hand, has some very firm opinions about women's choices. They talked late into the night about the future waiting in Denver, about the life they'd build on their own terms. A small house, maybe, with a garden, work that satisfied, love that sustained, simple dreams for complicated people. As Sarah drifted toward sleep in Jack's arms, she thought about the journey from Redemption Creek to here. Not just miles traveled, but souls transformed. The woman who'd stood in her kitchen that morning, preparing to leave, seemed a stranger now. That woman had been afraid, guilty, torn between worlds. This woman, Grace, was none of those things. She was free, in love, choosing her path with eyes wide open and heart unashamed. The preacher's widow had hidden her desires until a drifter showed her they weren't sins, but signposts pointing toward authentic life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices, new chances to live boldly. But tonight, under stars that blessed outlaws and angels alike, Sarah McKenna completed her transformation into Grace Wheeler. The widow's weeds were sold. The wedding ring transformed to liberation money. The old life buried deeper than any grave. What remained was truth, love, the endless horizon promising everything to those brave enough to chase it. Jack stirred beside her. "What are you thinking?" "That every ending is also a beginning. That sometimes you have to burn down who you were to discover who you are." She kissed him softly. "That I'm glad the drifter forced that kiss that burned my soul." "Forced," he chuckled. "As I recall, you were quite willing." "Willing?" Grace laughed, free and unfettered. "I was desperate for it, for you, for this, for everything we're building from the ashes." They slept then, 2 outlaws wrapped in love and starlight, riding toward a future written by their own hands. Behind them, Redemption Creek slumbered in its small certainties. Ahead, the whole world waited, terrible and beautiful and absolutely theirs for the taking. The transformation was complete. The story just beginning. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining us on Sarah and Jack's journey from the confines of Redemption Creek to the boundless freedom of the open trail. Their story reminds us that sometimes the greatest courage lies in choosing authenticity over acceptance, love over law, and freedom over the false safety of cages, however gilded they might be. Where are you listening to this tale of Wild West romance and redemption? Share your location in the comments below, whether you're in a bustling city dreaming of frontier freedoms, or perhaps in a small town understanding all too well the weight of others' expectations. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more stories of courage, passion, and transformation. set against the untamed backdrop of the American frontier. And please, share your thoughts on Sarah and Jack's journey. Did their choices resonate with you? What would you have done in their boots? Until next time, may you find the courage to chase your own horizons, wherever they might lead.